The world loves a big three. Be it record labels, sports, anime, TV, car manufacturers, historical figures, whatever your interest may be, you've probably heard the term thrown around once or twice. So taking that concept of the big three, let's use it for the big three unfinished fantasy series. Winds of Winter and Doors of Stone have already been discussed in their respective videos, but one more remains, The Thorn of Emberlain, part of the Gentleman Bastard series by Scott Lynch.
What I wanted to write was a character specifically who was not a plaster saint, a character who had some very severe human weaknesses to compensate for genuine audacity and genuine competence.
In the summer of 2006, The Lies of Locke Lamora released. It was an immediate hit, lauded for its interesting and rich setting, compelling characters, and twisting tragic plot. The next year, the sequel, Red Seas Under Red Skies, released. It too was well received, albeit not as well as its predecessor. Honestly, it's similar to Feast for Crows or Wise Man's Fear. Both of those books weren't as well received as the books that came before, even if they are in their own way really, really good. Though of course, all three have their respective problems.
You're gonna die for some chickens.
Someone is.
The third book, Republic of Thieves, did not release that next year in 2008. Instead, it would take 6 years, eventually releasing in October of 2013. Republic of Thieves was clearly a sign of what was to come, because this book was an uphill battle for Scott. The reasons for that are understandable and sympathetic. Scott would go through a divorce during this time, combined with a nasty bout of depression, and for the cherry on top, he also had writer's block. Basically the big three for not finishing a novel for many, many years. Despite those struggles, Republic of Thieves only took 6 years and also received good reviews. It's here that our history of Thorn begins. That same year, in December, only 2 months after the release of Republic of Thieves, Scott would say in an interview that 2014 was looking like a possibility. My next book, The Thorn of Emberlain, ought to be out in the fall of 2014. The fourth book in the Gentleman Bastard sequence picks up about half a year after the Republic of Thieves and finds Locke Lamora and Gene Tannen trying to get back on their feet with a major con. They're trying to sell the services of a non-existent mercenary company to the besieged city-state of Emberlain, hoping to escape with the hiring fees before the chaos of the Vadran Civil War overruns Emberlain. Naturally, things don't go according to plan. In early 2014, Scott would, on 2 separate occasions, confirm he's working on Thorn. One was this tweet where he mentions listening to the Dread soundtrack while writing, and then there's this interview where he not only mentions writing Thorn, but also 3 novellas, one of which will be called The Mad Baron's Mechanical Attic. Here he explains that these 3 novellas will bridge the gap between Republic and Thorn, and that they could come out later that year or early into 2015. Thorn itself was seemingly still expected by mid-2014, but as the months passed and summer arrived, Scott would explain in a blog that the book would be delayed slightly. Quote, as to the second question, I do not generally comment on my progress in public, but Thorn is very deeply underway, and is, especially compared to its immediate predecessor, going to cross the finish line only a bit later than I'd hoped. While a delay was surely disappointing, it had been a surprisingly optimistic assumption to assume that Thorn would come out in only a year's time, so the book arriving a little later than hoped wasn't the end of the world. In March of 2015, more news occurred when the cover for the UK version of Thorn was released. It should be pointed out this is the only novel of the big three to have official cover art shown to the public. With that reveal, hopes were once again running high that Thorn would be out within a year, or at least sometime soon. Unfortunately, that's just not how things played out. In August, Scott would say this: Dear readers and fans of the Gentleman Bastards, I'll lay it out as plainly as I can. With the utmost regret, we have been compelled to move The Thorn of Emberlain from its expected autumn 2015 release date to a 2016 date. I requested an opportunity to write this note so I could emphasize how little this is the fault of anyone but myself. My publishers around the world have in fact held the door open for a length of time that is somewhere between heroic and insane. The fault is mine. The severity of my ongoing anxiety attacks have simply made it impossible to turn the manuscript in and commit to the accelerated production process our original release date would have required. While this is not the outcome we'd hoped for, we have every expectation that this will ultimately do more good than harm. I will continue to try and keep you more closely informed of Thorn's progress, and I don't think it will be long before we'll be able to announce that the manuscript is secure, and the production process has begun. We're very close. So Thorn wouldn't come out that autumn, but Scott was confident it was close. It should also be said that in 2015, on 2 separate occasions, Scott would actually read excerpts from Thorn. First in August at Worldcon, then later in November at World Fantasy Convention. Though disappointingly, as far as I can find, there is no transcript or video of either of these readings. That next year in May would further prove the point that Thorn was close, when it was announced that Thorn was coming out September of 2016. We're delighted to announce that publication of Scott Lynch's brilliant new novel, The Thorn of Emberlain, has been moved to September 2016. to coincide with his appearance as a guest of honor at FantasyCon by the Sea. September is the perfect moment for Scott to tour the UK and celebrate the publication of his fourth novel in the Gentleman Bastard sequence, and we can't wait to share it with you. Later in June, even more good news appeared. Sketches of the map for Thorn were released as well. As you can see, it shows the Kingdom of the Seven Marrows with the titular Emberlain here. With both the map and the release date of September 22nd, things were looking really good. And it seemed that Thorn was locked in and would be released soon. Of course, that's not how things actually went. In August, only a month before the book was scheduled to release, it would be delayed. As you've probably noticed, retailers have been doing funny things with pre-orders of the Thorn of Emberlain, and the reason for that is because despite all their hopes and the heroic patience of my publishers, we're not going to make the expected September release date. I am incredibly sorry about this, and I want it to be understood that there's nobody to blame but me. In addition to the expected obstacles, I severely complicated my life this year by moving. The process of seeking a mortgage, securing a house, and moving across half a continent has eaten months of my time and made it very difficult to recover lost ground on several projects. While surely many fans were disappointed, the reasons for this delay were completely reasonable. And since Scott had already had a concrete release date, it seemed that Thorn must have been mostly done around this time, meaning, hopefully, the book could only be delayed maybe a couple months at most. Once again, that didn't happen. 2017 was a very quiet year. I could only find 2 mentions of Thorn during that time. First is a February tweet in which Scott says that those who buy a book during his eBay sale will get a couple of signed pages from the Thorn of Emberlain manuscript. I have not been able to find any proof that anyone received these pages. The second mention of Thorn comes from this interview, where Scott is asked, getting the obligatory question that no one wants to answer out of the way then, how is the book coming along? To which he replies, everything with my 4th book, The Thorn of Emberlain, is coming along really well. I'm only being slightly facetious when I say that I should be at home working on it rather than here in Sweden and Finland, traveling between cons. But some of these things are unavoidable. As strange as it seems to look at this as a professional commitment, I suppose it really is. My wife and I will have an uninterrupted 2-month period after we go home, during which I basically hope to get the book turned in, and then we can begin setting a firmer schedule for its publication. For the most part, I'm very pleased with it. I'm pretty sure that I can fix the stuff that I'm not pleased with in about 8 or so weeks. Scott would also be asked the question, is there anything you're allowed or willing to tell us about the Thorn of Emberlain and what to expect, such as who we might be reading about, or is it still very hush-hush? And Scott would give this answer. It's not entirely hush-hush. I can reaffirm stuff I've already said and try hard not to spoil anything. It does follow about 6 months after the end of the Republic of Thieves. It picks up on the northwest coast of the continent that Locke lives on, in the city-state of Emberlain. It does focus on the actual civil war in the Kingdom of the Seven Marrows. Every book has had a thematic shift and a plot shift. The first book was essentially the revenge tale. The second book was a heist novel. The third book was politics and romance, and this book is war. Locke and Jean will engage in a scheme that brings them into direct contact with an unfolding civil war, and their efforts to profit from it are going to complicate their lives forever. We're also going to meet a new cast of recurring characters who are going to be in total political opposition to everything Locke and Jean want to accomplish, and that is Anton Strada and his family. He's a teenager who finds himself essentially fighting in a suddenly very vicious portion of the Civil War to stay alive, let alone claim his eventual succession to the throne. Locke and Jean in previous books have used the rumored threat of a civil war in the Kingdom of the Seven Marrows to make money as part of a scam, and now it's actually happened and it's going to severely mess up the world. So it is the biggest of the Gentleman Bastard sequence thus far in terms of scale. We're going to see actual battles. There's a lot of stuff that we've previously not seen, and it's going to be the biggest challenge and the most complicated infiltration scheme that Locke has ever run. Despite Scott's hope that Thorn could be turned in after he returned home, this did not happen. And 2017 passed without any more news or release dates. 2018 proved itself to be even more of a barren year for news. In fact, the only mention of Thorn of Emberlain that I can find seems to be this Twitter post, where Scott says this. The Thorn of Emberlain introduces a new set of major long-term characters for Locke and Jean to be thoroughly opposed by. As the Vadran Civil War and the Emberlain secession heat up, I'm bringing in a lot of Vadrans to stab and be stabbed. So despite the past several years hinting towards the books being done soon, 2018 came and went with no new book. Let's move on. In May of 2019, Scott would tweet this. While the manuscript that came in the mail is really neat, I think the one I finished a draft of around 11:30 last night might for some people be even more interesting. Yes, I have completed a draft of Thorn which will now go to my editors for consideration and planning. This is not a formal announcement of a release date. there will not be such an announcement for a while yet, please stay tuned. In June of that year, Scott would launch a Substack, and he would advertise it by saying this: I've pulled my draft of the Thorn of Emberlain out of the drawer, and if you'd like to know everything I can say as soon as I can say it during the editing and planning process, and then he has his Substack linked below. And that was the last time that Thorn was mentioned publicly in 2019. 2020 contained no news of novels at all, and instead we have to skip the year and go on to 2021 for a big update. That summer, Scott would release a lengthy Substack saying, quote, in my miniature Prince Vault are at a minimum 7 short stories, a novella, a novelette, a novel, and a number of essays for this newsletter. At the beginning of the pandemic, I would occasionally joke with myself or my wife that we don't want a Prince Vault situation, but here we are having one. The plain fact is, my career as a writer is in danger at the moment, and the danger grows with every month I don't get this under some measure of control. Because while my existing books continue to perform very well, there's a difference between being a working writer and a person who used to write. And there's only so much my patient editors and publishers and readers can be asked to wait for without clear answers. There's very little practical value in being a writer who falls over heaving and gasping every time he attempts to show people what he's made. In short, there's very little practical value in me as I presently am, and I am desperately tired of this. Tired of it ruining my fun, tired of it confusing my audience, tired of it eating my self-respect, tired of it receding a little bit only to come back roaring stronger than ever. 2022 would provide another update. In June, Scott would tweet this: what if Gentleman Bastard stuff, but new? What if I seem to be having fresh and unusual success with a new anti-anxiety medication? What if my agent and my editors got to read the first new Bastard stuff I've sent them in ages, literally years? They have. Anyway, here's the fun part. Some of you know that I've owed Bill Schaefer at Subpress a set of Gentleman Bastard novellas for an embarrassing length of time. I've decided to remedy that. The exciting, world-shatteringly brilliant title of this work: Untitled Gentleman Bastard Novella Number 1. I'm sorry, that's all I've got for now. For 15 years, I've had titles firmly in mind long before word 1 hits the page, and this one, it's just being squirrely. So we're not going to talk about it much this week or next. It's kind of difficult to give a hard push to something called Untitled 1. The next novella in the sequence is The Mad Baron's Mechanical Attic, and the last is The Choir of Knives. Those novels have their stuff together. Collectively, these 3 novellas form a bridge narrative, inessential but enriching, taking Locke and Jean from immediately after Republic to immediately before Thorn. Earlier planned/drafted versions of these novellas had other proposed subjects, but this is what they've evolved to in their final form. Unfortunately, news would not come that next month, but instead in November. Scott would go on a podcast, and among many topics discussed, writing was of course brought up. Lynch said that as of November 2022, that at least one novella would be released in the coming year.
Was about them? Are they due soon? Are they in the pipeline?
Yes, little baby Untitled Lynch number 1, because I'm so uncharacteristically stymied for a title for this damn thing. I'm not used to working on stuff that doesn't have a title. I'm used to having something very firmly in mind, even if it's just a placeholder. And then it's little siblings, the Mad Baron's Mechanical Attic and the Choir of Knives. You should be seeing at least one of them in the coming year, hopefully more than that.
Now, that didn't happen, but he also mentioned Thorn, saying it was in a happy place and that because of new medication, as mentioned in his blog, he was able to work.
Are you able to say how Thorn is coming along? Thorn of Emberlain, the next full novel in the series.
Thorn, I think at the moment is actually in a pretty happy spot. I've like I said, I've been pretty open in the last couple months about the fact that I've had some major drug-related success in terms of my general and specific anxiety. And I've been working very hard in what you might call a freshened mental state.
So Thorn wasn't done, neither were the novellas, but they were progressing. 2023 would start off quite strongly with a January update from Lynch. Here he would give an update on his writing and a sneak peek at one of the novellas. What I want to give you now is a glimpse of the first of several forthcoming Gentleman Bastard novellas I owe Subterranean Press. These 3 bite-sized Locke Lamora and John Tannen adventures each should be around 15 to 25% as long as a full-size Bastards novel, collectively form a bridge narrative, describing how the lads cross a continent and characteristically find trouble at every step, starting a few minutes after the end of the Republic of Thieves. and continuing to the very edge of the Thorn of Emberlain. They are absolutely not essential for readers of the main sequence books. I'm working firmly to the rule that Thorn readers who are completely unaware of the existence of the novellas should not get a sense that anything is missing. I have every hope, however, that they will enrich the experience of every constant reader and sweeten the long gap between the third and fourth books of the main sequence. Below was an excerpt from one of the novellas, one that I won't read, but if you're desperate for more of the Gentleman Bastards, I would recommend you check it out. And now, on to 2024. That February, Scott would announce new novels for the Lies of Loch Lamora, and below that announcement, when somebody would ask him about Thorn, Scott would say this: "We're going to have a lot more announcements for various stuff coming up. Let's just say that I didn't get fancy new author photos on a whim." In August, more news would arrive, this time some pretty big stuff. During Worldcon 2024, Scott would discuss the 3 novellas. First, it was once again reiterated that the novellas would bridge the gap between Republic and Thorn, but that they wouldn't be necessary to read. It was just more Loch Lamora for those who really want it. Scott also stated that each novella reaches about 40,000 words, and the titles would be More Than Fools Fill Graves, The Mad Baron's Mechanical Attic, and The Choir of Knives. There was also a 2-part short story announced. This one titled Loch Lamora and the Bottled Serpent, which is set to release in the Grimdark magazine during their October and January editions. Thorn itself did not receive an update that August, but if the 3 novellas, which combined are being called Road to Emberlain, are supposed to release soon, then perhaps Thorn is closer than some people may expect. And that brings us to the present, as that was the most recent update as of August 2024. Unlike the others in the unfinished Big 3 fantasy series, this one remains the most likely to release. Which is nice, it's good to have some positivity considering that the possibility of Doors releasing is about 0, and Winds seems unlikely as well. Of course, unfortunately, Thorn isn't the last book or second to last book like Doors or Winds. Instead, it's the 4th of a projected 7-novel journey. After Thorn is the Ministry of Necessity, the Mage and the Master Spy, and finally Inherit the Night. And along with those are the 3 novellas I've been mentioning. So perhaps on pure word count, Scott Lynch has a lot to write, even more than Rothfuss and maybe G.R.R. Martin, but I still think it's fair to have some optimism. I don't want this to age poorly, but during this research I've been doing, it seems like Scott Lynch has been writing a lot, he's just suffering from anxiety. So regardless, I think these books will come out in due time. But this has been the complete history of the Thorn of Emberlain from 2013 to 2024. Really hope that book comes out soon. Anyway, I'll quickly show the fact that I've made a video on Winds of Winter and Doors of Stone, so if you're interested in either of those books, I would recommend you check those videos out. But that's all I have. Thank you for watching.